Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Greg Cochran, and I'm the Executive Vice President with Pilco and Associates. I am joined today by Nash Stewart. Nash is one of our newest advisors, and Nash comes to us with a wealth of background, experience, knowledge on major capital projects. And so the subject today is, why do mega projects fail? And then how do you turn those things around, or how do you begin with the end in mind and make things successful? So Nash, before you get into details, tell us about yourself.
Thanks, Greg. I appreciate the introduction and the opportunity. Yeah, so I recently retired from ExxonMobil. I was in the ExxonMobil Global Projects Company, had about 32 years experience with ExxonMobil, and had the opportunity to work in a number of countries around the world, including the US, on some very large projects, both oil and gas, onshore and offshore. So it's great to have some opportunity to share that experience with others.
Super. And I think that's going to be the lead into the first question that's on my mind, Nash. You have worked globally on mega projects, small, medium, and large, I'm sure. Probably there's a lot of things you could share that are attributes of successful projects versus the unsuccessful project. Let's start with the unsuccessful. Why do projects fail? And I know that's a very broad question, so take all the time you want to kind of paint a picture for us.
Well, you know, traditionally people talk about project success as cost and schedule, right? And certainly that's the metric from when you're looking at the project itself is, did it come in within the budgeted cost, and did it come in on the schedule for which it was, was appropriated and scheduled as well. But sometimes people don't talk about project performance as in, did it achieve the business results that you wanted? And, from a larger perspective, that's really the more important item. You can overrun cost, you can overrun schedule, but if you achieve the business objective, whatever that is for the project, then it's a success. Of course, you want it to be safe. You want to have a great safety record on your project. You want to achieve the cost and the schedule for which it was appropriated. But really, you need it to perform too, and is it working as it intended? That's really the ultimate judge of a project's success or failure.
Nash, thank you so much for that. Why do you think they fail? What is the reason behind it?
Well, when you're in execution, Greg, lots of things can go wrong, right? But oftentimes it's just upfront planning. And that's really the key, I think, is upfront planning of how you want to execute that project. That is vitally important. And even before that, to achieve the business performance that you want for your business, have you thought through all the scenarios on the project? Is it robust in all the market conditions? Have you anticipated what could go wrong? If you thought about the labor market, have you set up the contracts in your contract strategy to achieve the results that you want and that fit your labor market, that fit the economic conditions during the time that you're executing the project? Lots of upfront, business planning to me is the real key to that. And that's just vital, really, for making the project a success.
So you just really triggered something in my mind. Most people would measure project success based on, it started here, it's on schedule, it's within the budget, like you said earlier. The process you just described starts years before that, right? I mean, so talk about that. How far in advance do you need to start this planning process?
For large, international oil and gas projects, planning will begin many, many years in advance. It's not uncommon for that to begin 6 or 7 years before a project comes online, or even longer than that for some of the larger projects. It takes a lot of time to do that. And really that upfront planning is where it pays off. And, I always say sometimes the oil and gas industry, we make money in spite of ourselves. It takes a lot of effort to plan these large projects out. The time and the people involved, it stretches out a long time.
So you've been involved in those early phases, I presume. So you're part of the business assessment of the value add of that project. And there's got to be a lot of assumptions that go into those. And you said it yourself, the market changes rapidly sometimes. How do you course correct if some of your assumptions are wrong?
Yeah. Well, one of the key things you have to do, Greg, is define the objective and agree on the objective of the project. Um, I think all too often people get confused and think the objective of the project is to build some facility, when really that's not the case. You need to look, with a different and larger aperture of the capital project is really simply intended to solve a problem, right? It's to resolve an issue, to meet new regulatory requirements, to move gas or oil from offshore to onshore. And there are some times when doing a capital project may not be the right answer. Depending on what you're trying to do, sometimes you can avoid the capital project with a contract solution. And if you can do that and avoid the capital expenditure, that's fantastic. Because we all know, once you build a facility, you've got to maintain it, you've got to man it, you've got to care for it. And so we need to think sometimes about solving problems as not just putting in capital facilities, but really just solving the problem, with a little bit larger aperture, I think, than sometimes people look at.
So I'm sure you've probably been on those cases where you begin down a plan of, here's what the business case says, here's the economics around all of that, here's the perfect timing for that. And then you have to course correct somewhere in that process. Can you give us an example of how you've done that and share that with others?
Yeah, that's a great question, Greg. One time I was working at a refinery, and we had the coker, one of three cokers burned down, and that was vital to the business, obviously, because we took all the heavies and we put them in the coking units. One of the three cokers burned down. It really backed up the refinery. It cut our throughput quite a bit. So we set out to build another coker, and we did. And we did it, quite honestly, in record time. But in the meantime, a group was set up to say, hey, what can we do to push more through the refinery? We can heavy up. We can lighten up the slate a bit. We can do other things. But continuous improvement over the course of building that new coker, it got to the point, quite honestly, with it, by the time the new coker came online, we didn't need it. We had made so many process improvements over the course of that time that we had to put in a heavy up sour up project to refill the coker. And I think it was just an example to me, and one that sticks with me in my career, of challenge the organization. And you just never know what can be achieved. So that was at the end. At the end, the result was great. It was good for business. But I just wonder, what would have happened if we'd have challenged ourselves before we had to build that new coker.
Wow, that's a brilliant example. Thank you so much for sharing that. I love that story. So you've also been involved in large joint venture projects as well. Are there any idiosyncrasies specific to a JV that maybe change the way you approach a major capital project?
Well, yes, yeah, and I've been fortunate to be in a number of joint ventures around the world, 4 or 5 of them with different national oil companies and resource owners, and that's always fun, right? That's just a great experience, and it's one that I found one of the most satisfying in my career, is to do that. But working in a joint venture is a different approach. National oil companies and international oil companies often have different objectives, often some overlap, but you can have different objectives too. And finding that common ground and finding the key issues and then strategies to resolve those issues is just vital, really, to success of a joint venture. Those projects can be very rewarding. It's profitable for the international oil company. It's great for the IOC because it helps lift that country's economy and brings wonderful rewards for the citizenship of that country. But working together to do that it can be challenging, but you need to identify those key issues up front.
So Nash, we've talked a lot about major capital projects and how you make them successful. I suspect that alignment from beginning to end is one of those key things or key measurables or deliverables that are necessary. Can you talk to us about just making sure people are aligned throughout the whole process?
The first thing is alignment's not an event, right?
Hmm.
You might have an alignment workshop, but it's not an event, it's a process. And the one that you have to work from beginning to end through all stages of the project, right? Back when it's business development, when you're trying to decide, is this worthy of our investment? Before you make the business decision, align on what the objective is. What are the key issues that we both need to achieve? What are the key issues we need to address so that we remain aligned in this process? What do we both want out of that? And then setting up a governance structure in a joint venture, particularly on how you're going to make decisions on that project. Or do you have one group that's set up senior management to resolve strategic issues? And then can you have a lower level group that gets together to resolve technical or tactical issues? But having that aligned, having that governance structure set up, knowing what issues are going to go where, meet frequently, and often enough that you can resolve those issues, identify them up front. Because my experience would say that 9 out of 10 times you want the same thing. You may have different ideas on how to achieve it, but you want the same thing. And working together, you can really get the best of both worlds. But you're exactly right. Alignment is a big issue, but it's, like I said, it's not a process. I mean, it is a process. It's not an event.
Yeah, no, as soon as you said that, that was clicked, the light bulb went on in my mind. So that would be true certainly in the front end of the project. But let's say that you've got authorization, you're ready to begin. Procurement gets involved to select certain vendors and EPC companies, and talk about the actual process of managing through a project. How do you maintain that alignment all the way through?
So alignment through the process. It's really great if you can write down, Greg, what your objectives are in procurement, in execution, in startup and commissioning. What are you really trying to achieve? And putting that down on paper, to me, a project objectives and strategy sheet, and get into the details on each one of those. What do you want to achieve in procurement? Is it absolute lowest cost? Is it support of national contractors? Is it world open market? What are you trying to achieve? In defining that up front and getting agreement there will resolve a lot of issues down the road. It sets a great roadmap for how you're going to execute the project. And then you can carry the same thing over into execution too. What's your chief objective? And is it quality, or is it schedule, or is it cost? People often say you can pick any two of the three. It's kind of like going to college, right? Great social life, good grades, or plenty of sleep. Pick any two, right? And the same can be said for projects, right? But you have to decide what is your top objective, and people need to think through that. And what does that mean? So that when you have a time, when it comes time to make that decision, you've thought about it in advance.
So Nash, how do you set a project up for success, and what do you do if it starts going wrong?
Well, the first thing to me, Greg, is you need the right organization. And it's not, even before you get to the project execution, do you have the right business organization for that project? And what I found in my career is it's best to have a project development organization separate from a project execution organization. And the reason I say that is because the people that are executing projects, they want to execute projects. They want to go build something. And you want them to go do that. You want the people that want to go build something, you want them doing that. You want them in project execution. But you also need another organization ahead of that saying, what products do we need? What problem are we trying to solve? Is there a commercial solution to resolving our problem, to meeting a new regulatory requirement, to entering a new business, to reducing our transportation costs? Is there something that we can do different than just putting capital on the ground?
Mm.
And you want someone that has a really wide view of the industry doing that. And it may be the right answer is a capital project.
Mm-hmm.
But you need to have a pretty wide aperture looking for how do you actually solve the problem first. And if it's executing a project, a capital project, then go do it. But have an organization that really is good at that. Have another organization saying, hey, how do we solve the problem?
So where does operations come in? You mentioned this earlier, sometimes building a capital project is the answer, but when it is, you have to plan for the eventual, we're done, commissioning and startup takes over, and then operations has it. Where does operations enter into this? What's the optimal time?
As soon as there's a business decision to go execute a project, when you're just doing advanced commitment funding on a project, to me, that's the right time to get operations in this. And that's operations in the broadest sense. If you've got a separate maintenance organization, you want them in at the same time. You want to bring those people in, and you want to bring in people that are experienced. They've been around different parts of your company and that can speak for those organizations, whether it's purely operations or operations and maintenance, and make decisions, ones that reflect the values of that organization and for the project itself. Particularly for brownfield projects, right? You can't do urban renewal, right? You just have to bring in the new facilities and repair the ones that you need to make that work. You can't fix every problem that's out there. So you need an operations or maintenance representative or both that has that same vision of what you need to achieve. But bring them in early, because ultimately they're the customer, right, of the project organization is operations. It's going to run the facilities. So you got to keep that in mind.
So Nash, tell me about characteristics of a successful project. You've had many project successes along the way. What are the main characteristics of a successful project?
Well, there's 3 or 4 that I would say are common, Greg. One is having a clear objective and strategy on what you're trying to achieve. That's vitally important. The second one is alignment. We talked about that. It's a process. It's not an event. And that is alignment at both the management level, so strategically, and then tactically all the way down to your project team. And in the course of doing that, I think it's important to get a cold eyes perspective when you're executing the project, bringing in a true outsider, a group of outsiders to look at your project and make sure that you're going to get the results that you expect. So that's the third thing. And then I would add a fourth thing, Greg, and that is adaptability. By definition, mega projects are long in duration and high in cost, and remaining adaptable. That means really, have you got an organization where you're planning for that time period is going to take? Have you got succession planning in place? That your contracts, have you put in factors so that your contracts can be renewed, or they going to survive the economic changes that are bound to happen in the years that you're executing? Remaining adaptable. That's probably the fourth big item.
Nash, thank you. Just a wealth of information that you shared in a very short period of time. It's such a pleasure to hear you talk about those things, though, because I in all honesty, most companies struggle in that space, and it's abundantly obvious when you see the project results. So thank you. If you would like to know more about Philco and Associates, please check us out at www.philco.com. And if you'd like to hear more from Nash about what he can do to help you with your capital project, don't hesitate to reach out to me, Greg Cochran at philco.com, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you. We hope that you stay COVID free and healthy and safe. All the best to you and your families.